I think it's very telling that the Dutch, like the only thing you can talk about in Dutch cuisine is all sweets, like chocolate sprinkles, stroopwafels.
Never.
There's no such thing as Dutch.
No hacks invited to the party. No hacks invited to the show. We've got a good thing going. No hacks invited today.
Welcome to nohacks.show, a weekly podcast in which smart people talk to you about better online experiences. The topic for this week is Empowered Teams Model in Experimentation, and I have a guest who was a key piece of probably the most well-known experimentation team ever at Booking.com. Lukas Vermeer, Director of Experimentation at Vista, advisor at AB Smartly, and an occasional public speaker, to quote the understatement from your LinkedIn page. Lukas, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm flattered. That's a very nice.
Come on, that's all you. That's all you. So welcome to the show. Pleasure to have you on. Now,
Thank you.
I've had several guests from the Netherlands because there's something in the water there, I guess. There's a lot of experimentation people. And I asked everyone why the experimentation culture is so strong there. More than a few pointed at Booking.com as kind of a shining light and an example.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm asking you why, and you cannot say because of Booking.com, because there was something before Booking.com.
You're taking away my first answer. Why? I think that maybe it's a fun question, and I have to be honest. I have debated that with my fellow Dutch experimentation colleagues before. The truth is, we don't really know, right? It's the kind of thing where you sort of guess, but we don't really know. I think one of the possible reasons has to do with very low power hierarchy here. So that if you think about the Hofstede, the cultural dimensions, and the sort of like ability to speak to power is very high here, which is something that helps when you're running experiments. It's good if you are able to sort of speak up to the boss and say, hey, actually we have some data here. I think another is just entrepreneurial spirit. I think the Dutch have always been, or at least for the last 600 years or so, a pretty practical and money-minded people, put it that way. And so this idea that you would let go of your own ego and test things empirically, I think, is something that lives in the Dutch psyche. But I do want to say, like, I think Booking wasn't a reason. Like, it's not that Booking made experimentation big in the Netherlands, but it certainly was a factor, I think, in the sense that it pulled a lot of people into the Netherlands, and it shared a lot of knowledge with people in the Netherlands. I think in some sense, maybe I'm wrong, and just the Netherlands just got lucky in the sense that
I doubt
Booking
it.
had to be founded somewhere.
Okay.
Or that kernel sort of spins up more and more experimentation culture around it. Although I'm not even sure Booking was the first one in the Netherlands to start doing experiments. People like Pon Wesseling have been around forever. Like,
I think it's just the most well-known, internationally at least. It's the most well-known example.
That's probably true. Yeah.
Probably true. So it's not the chocolate sprinkles you're telling me that makes the Dutch good at experimentation, or the whatever you call it, the thing you put on everything.
The stroopwafels.
Yeah,
Or
nothing.
as they're known abroad, the stroopwafels.
Okay.
Not how you say it, but
No, not that.
delicious. True.
It's definitely not that.
I think it's very telling that the Dutch, like the only thing you can talk about in Dutch cuisine is all sweets, like chocolate sprinkles, stroopwafels.
Never thought of it that way, but I also never thought about the Dutch cuisine. No shots fired.
There's no such thing as Dutch.
That's exactly what I mean. This ASMR segment is now over. Let's continue with the
Sorry, I
interview.
think I just offended my entire country. I'm sorry.
No.
Sorry.
Hey, you can't be great at everything. You cannot be great at everything. Let's just put it that way. And you're great at a lot of things. So, we're talking about
Water,
a what?
water management. We're very
I mean, you kind of invented it.
No, well, yeah.
In this way, yes, you did. Yes, you did. You're good at a lot of things. Come on. Let's talk about the empowered teams model. And like, if there's a few people in the world who really can talk about this, and you're one of them. So let's talk about what it is. Like, why is empowered teams model better than other models?
It's interesting that you say that because I came at this from a very, very weird angle. So let me give you a bit of context. I worked at Booking for about 8 years, and Booking has a particular way of working with teams. I'll talk about that later. And then I left Booking and joined another company, Vista. And one of the first things I noticed is that they had a different way of working. And people recommended that I should read this book, Empowered, by a man named Marty Kagan. And they said, this is the Empowered Teams model. It's awesome. We want to adopt it. And you should read it to understand what it means. And I'll be honest, I tried reading that book and I stopped after 50 pages because I thought it was too obvious to continue reading. The things that they were describing seemed to me like, well, yes, that's just the way things work. It took me a while to realize that Vista wasn't operating in this way and that the book wasn't intended for me. It was intended for people who aren't used to working this way. And so my approach to Empower Product Team model has pretty much been living it for about a decade before realizing that it had a name. and that it was a thing that some people were doing and other people were not doing. And so I think I'm not what would you call like an expert like person to talk about this. I'm just someone who has experienced it, which is somewhat different. The idea behind the Empower
but not
Product Team
really
model-
different. Not really different.
So the basic idea behind the model is that teams should be as self-sufficient in solving a customer problem or a business problem as much as possible, and that you should build cross-functional teams, so heterogeneous teams with multiple crafts in them, around a problem to solve. And so a lot of organizations, especially historically, would have an IT department, a business department, a marketing department, and a design department. And then when stuff needs to get done, work progresses through these different departments, or maybe you set up a temporary project team around a particular thing that you want to build, but the crafts are basically embedded in different organizations, and that is their primary reporting structure. The Empower Product Team model flips that on its head and says, no, actually, we want a team that has the engineers, designers, product people, business people together in a team. That is their primary unit. And together they solve customer problems. And the craft reporting, or the IT versus business versus design, is almost matrixed on top of that, but isn't their primary team. And so the way I explained this to people at Vista is, when I joined, then I would ask a software developer, what is your team and what are you working on? They would name the name of their engineering squad, and they would name the services that they were building. Whereas at Booking, if you ask an engineer, what is your team and what are you working on? They would say, I am on the homepage team.
Right.
And we build solutions for customers to discover the different things that we offer. And so they think of their team in terms of the cross-functional team of people that they're working with, rather than the craft that they're working with. And they think of their objectives or their ownership as something that is a customer need or a business need, rather than for like technical pieces of ownership. I think that is at the core, the idea behind the Empower Product Team model. Because once you have that, then you can go to such a team and say, hey, your job is to, I don't know, in my case, I was responsible for search for a while at Booking. And so my job with the team was to help people find the hotel that they wanted. That's
Right.
it. Like, you figure out how. You are empowered to build solutions. You're empowered to do research. But you as a group with designers, developers, and product people, try to figure out what is stopping people from finding the hotel that they need, and then figure out ways to solve for that need.
So it's really a task-oriented, task by the customer, but user-oriented and self-sufficient. Like that's kind of the key. You're not going to wait for your IT team for like 2 weeks to deliver something. No, everything is there. The speed is kind of by far the biggest benefit of
Yes,
ownership and speed,
that's the benefit that people hope to get, right? That
Yeah.
by having this ownership, you get more speed because you have you have shorter communication points between the engineers and the product people and the designers. I think there's also something to be said for when you split this by responsibility, the stuff falls between the cracks, where the engineer says, well, I just built the spec, and the product person says, well, engineering doesn't do what I say. And so there's something lost in translation. And if you put those people together and say you are jointly responsible, then the team has to figure out how to make sure nothing falls between the cracks. And there's no excuse of like, hey, they are doing it wrong or they're doing it wrong. So I think there's something to be said for that efficiency as well.
That's really good. So obviously, most organizations don't operate this way, for whatever reason.
My
But
surprise, yeah.
to your surprise, yes, you had to read 50 pages of a book to learn that, to figure that out, right? But other than that's not how they did it traditionally, what's the reason for most organizations actually operating in a different way still?
That's a good question. I think one is that it's actually difficult to execute the empowered product team model.
Okay.
Because it demands a lot from teams and demands a lot from leaders. It's a different way of operating that requires teams to take a lot more ownership and for leaders to lead in a different way. So I think it's just difficult to execute. I think the other is that as organizations grow, it's actually very natural to say, oh, the engineers reporting to engineering managers,
Yeah.
the designers reporting to design managers. So I think it comes quite natural to organize by craft. And it's also, at some point, there's still one CEO, right? So at some point, these reporting lines still need to come together. So the empowered product team model, to me, isn't really a completely different model. You're just shifting where you start splitting the craft. Like, is it at the
Right.
is it all the way at the top of the tree where all the designers are over here and all the engineers are over here? Or are you doing it by business unit where you have a business unit leader and then within each business unit you have engineers and designers? Or are you doing it by team, right? Where each team has so it's a matter of degree of where you put the split, where the empowered product team model is putting the split as low as possible in the tree where each
Right.
team actually has all the crafts. Why haven't more companies adopted this?
Why isn't it a default way? Like, you're building a company, it's growing, and why isn't this the way you do it? Is it still like the lazy way of this box is for engineers, this box is for designers, just put everyone there? It's just easier to manage? Or is something else?
I've asked myself this question many times because if you think about it, when you're a startup and you have 3 people,
Well,
you are an empowered product team by design.
Yeah.
Right? There's no way around it. Like, you are an empowered product team. Then when you scale out and you build the second team, probably you're still operating in the same way, right? You still have 2 heterogeneous teams that have tasks. And as you grow, there comes a moment where apparently most organizations then say, oh, this is no longer the way we want to work. We're going to flip the org and suddenly organize by craft. And I haven't really looked at when that happens or why that happens. I've been so busy sort of pushing in the other direction that I haven't thought about this question.
let's go back to
Question,
whisper.
actually.
Let's go back to whisper mode. It's when the money comes in. Like, it's clearly when the money enters.
Is that when it happens?
I think when you need to grow quickly because someone invested a lot of money, like the
Yes.
lazy way is to say the yellow box is for yellow things, the blue box is for blue things, and just put everything that way. I'm not saying there's any reason to do it that way. I'm just saying it's the easier way to organize things.
Well, so I guess the question then is like, why didn't this happen for Booking? At least not while I was there. Like, Booking was a small startup.
Right.
They started growing, and
Well,
this never happened for them.
because there's exceptions to every rule. I'm seriously saying that. Like, I mean, that's evolution, basically. Something happens, there's a mutation, and then everyone starts seeing, oh, this mutation actually helped the giraffe get to the leaves better.
And this is the thing, when you think about, when you read Marty Cagan's books, I mean, later I did read them, by the way, like years.
The remaining pages.
I realized they were actually valuable books, so I do think it's useful.
Right.
It does seem to me that a lot of the companies that we look to as like success stories of the internet age, they do operate this way. So if you look at, I don't know, Airbnb, if you look at Facebook, you look at Google, look at Amazon, they all have variations on this model where empowered teams, so heterogeneous teams with multiple skills in them, are long-lived on a particular business problem. And so they're not temporary projects where we put these crafts together for a temporary thing, but they are long-lived on a particular problem space, and they're allowed to sort of figure out how to solve for that particular problem space. And so I think there's got to be a reason that like all these companies are finding similar ways. I think it's more the incumbents, it's the older companies that have been around for longer that aren't operating this way, that are now trying to move in that direction.
Probably.
And that's why I hadn't thought about your question of like, why do companies end up going the other way? Like, I wonder whether companies are still doing that. Like new startups that were found in the last 10 years, do they still make that flip?
Great question. But I'll just say they saw what Booking did. And this is why, one of the reasons why they go Booking and other companies, of course. And this is why they saw this is what works. Facebook, Airbnb, all the ones we mentioned. This is better than, what they did 50 years ago. And maybe that's why the new companies, the startups, have a better way of doing things.
Can I play devil's advocate for my own argument?
Of course you can. Yes. The devil advocate section.
Isn't that, I mean, are we looking at survivorship bias? Like,
Yeah, okay. Yeah, yes.
Is it these companies are successful because they employed this model, or is it despite of employing this model?
That's a really,
And
really...
one of the reasons I ask is because one of the questions I have for me personally about the empowered product team model is, I mentioned before that it asks more of people, right? An engineer will have to be able to sit with a designer on their team and talk about design.
Yeah.
A product manager will have to be able to sit with an engineer on their team and talk about engineering. And so it requires people to think a little bit more broadly. We call these T-shaped. So you have one specific area of expertise, but you know a little bit about everything. And so I do think it requires a special type of person. And the question I have for myself is, can you teach that to everyone? Or is this really for like the best of the best? And is this something that can only be done if you have very good people in your organization? I don't know, right?
I guess no one does, but I guess no one knows. It's difficult. It's not easy thing to pull off. I'm sure of that. I don't think you need to be or have the best of the best people. I just think you need to put in the effort of trying to make it work. And you mentioned T-shaped. One thing I always think about when I say T-shaped, I'm not dating myself. This is an older movie, like from before my days, the Dirty Dozen movie, the old one, when they were training, I forgot even, I know it was Charles Bronson, if I'm not wrong, but I forgot who the lead guy was. All 12 guys had to learn all 12 roles. Like, what if someone dies? Like, what if our machine gunner dies? Someone has to take over. Yep. And that's basically what this is, what being T-shaped is. Like, you have your task, but you better know everything else because you never know. Yep. This is kind of, it's not, I don't think it's only best of the best. I really don't think this is reserved for best of the best. But I think the monumental effort that you need to invest to set this up is what's preventing most organizations from doing it. That's just
one of the reasons I'm still like I'm actually I think Vista is doing a great job actually in moving in this direction, and that's one of the reasons I'm sort of invested in this company. So I actually love seeing how this pans out and sort of seeing how I can be a small part of that. And I joined 3 years ago because I was interested in sort of expanding experimentation. But I've now drawn the conclusion that the reason we're talking about this model in the first place is that I think it's a prerequisite for scalable experimentation. It's no accident to me that the same companies that I mentioned as sort of like the new internet companies that are applying this model are also the ones we know for large scale experimentation. I think these two things are connected in the sense that if you want scalable experimentation, having empowered product teams is almost a necessity, because if you don't have that, then your experimentation cycles are going to be super slow. And then like the amount to learn from experiments is going to be very, very little. So I've been sort of shifting my focus a little bit away from experimentation in the last 2 years, spending more time thinking about how to actually change the organization to work in this way. I want to say like one last thing about the devil's advocate thing. I was reminded of Matt Gershoff from Conductrix, who has asked several times this question of, isn't there, like we look at companies that run experiments and that are successful, but and sort of assume that experimentation makes those companies successful, but that might be confounding, right? Maybe the companies that have the smartest people are companies that have smart people that want to run experiments and also have smart people that make the business successful. And so maybe there's sort of this confounding effect where we incorrectly draw the conclusion that experimentation helps these companies be successful. Now, there are some limited studies that seem to suggest that experimentation in and of itself has added value. But I do think it's a fair question of like, are we looking at confounding, or is this a
No, but if you just take a failing company, like old school company, and make them experiment, magic is not going to happen unless you change a lot of other things. So I think it's both. I think from what you said earlier, ownership of a problem, team having ownership, like search function at booking.com, and being with that problem for an extended period of time. I think that's the key here, because if you're working on a search feature that you worked on a year ago, you know what worked, what didn't. Like, yeah, who else knows that better than you do? Like, no one in the world literally knows that feature better than you do. So I guess that's kind of the biggest lift from what I see.
Yeah, it's important there to say that it's not owning the search service, right? It's not sufficient
No, of course.
owner of the technical capability.
Right.
It's owning the people finding what they need problem. And a search service might be one way you solve for that problem, but I think a lot of organizations
Great
do
point.
have
Great point.
ownership
Yeah.
of services, but that isn't sufficient. That's not
That's
what
a
you're
great
talking
point. That's a really, really good point. Yep. And a very important difference as well. So, quick question. Some organizations just cannot do this. What are alternatives to this model that are also kind of not bad, at least?
To the empowered product teams model?
Yes. None, according to you, right? Because you didn't know you didn't know there was another way, right?
So, let me tell you actually, so that's fine. Maybe there are, but I am like the least qualified person in the world to talk about this. To the extent that when I joined Vista, they were not operating this way. I joined the data and analytics organization. At the time, they had engineering, design, and data analytics as a separate organization. I joined, I looked at with their experimentation stack, and I said, well, we need to make some changes to the experimentation stack. I need to hire engineers for my team. And I was told that you cannot. Like, what do you mean you cannot? So, well, you are in the data and analytics organization. You can hire analysts, but you cannot hire engineers. So, but to solve my problem, to solve the need I see, this is the kind of skill that I need. And so I was lucky enough, I think, to find someone in engineering, Alejandro, who understood what I was trying to accomplish, and we agreed that he would set up a team in engineering.
Okay.
And then we would pretend that these people were on my team, and I would set their objectives, and I would sort of help them to draft their roadmap, and we would work together as one. And I said to Alejandro, this means you need to stop treating them like your team, and we need to agree that we are both the bosses of this joint team that has analysts and engineers in it. At the time, we didn't have a very strong product organization, so I was able to hire Kevin as a product manager by calling him a data product manager. And the word data meant
Just putting a label on the person.
They just put a label on
So
it,
it
so
works.
you have a data product manager. And so we built an empowered product team, essentially, in an organization that didn't have empowered product teams at all. And then for the first year and a half, I think, operated in this way, set KRs, like, did all the things I was used to at Booking, and not because I was convinced that this was the right way to do, but truthfully, because I don't know how to do it any other way. Like I don't. Your question is very apt. Like, what is the other? I don't know how to do stuff.
But
otherwise,
you said you're the least qualified person to answer the question. Let me tell you, there are worse things to be least qualified about. Like, it's kind of good.
yeah, I don't.
So,
I
yeah.
don't believe being bad at this particular one. I do wonder. Like, I was pretty sort of. I'm pretty. People. People put me on a pedestal a lot, and it makes me very uncomfortable because, like, going in, I'm a pretty humble. You wouldn't say so if you see me, but I'm pretty humble.
Hey, you have 50 conference speeches, and you said occasionally. You are humble. Period.
But humble in the sense of, like, when I joined Vista, and the moment I realized that they were working in a different way, I honestly asked myself, that's interesting. I wonder how that works.
Okay.
I didn't say we need to change this and this is wrong. That's not what I said. And I still don't believe it's wrong. I just don't know. I don't understand how it works. So my first response was to actually go like, oh, listen, I can't work my own team that way because I don't know how that works, but I'm going to watch out and see what other people are doing because I'm truthfully curious how other organizations try to accomplish this.
Right.
Because I don't know. I don't get it.
That's humble. That's humble. Let's call it humble. One final question about a LinkedIn post you had recently about the paper that was published. Was it 2017? I'm not sure which year it was. Democratizing online controlled experiments. It was a paper you co-authored about with shared insights into the world of Booking.com and online experimentation at Booking.com. Now, in my opinion, CRO and experimentation is as an industry, it's an industry that shares this knowledge. Contrast that to maybe not SEO today, but like SEO from 10, 20 years ago, where it was like, this is what I know. If I share, you'll beat me at it. Or maybe that's right, maybe that's not, but that's what the impression I had. Now, this paper and sharing in general, how does that help move experimentation forward?
Because I think most of us haven't actually figured out how to do many of these things in the best way.
That's a great answer. That's not what I thought you would say.
The only
but
way
that's
to
a great
improve
answer.
is to get
Yeah.
feedback. So
Yep.
when we put that paper out there, it was mostly about the infrastructure, and we managed to weasel in some things about culture and sort of like organizational dynamics. We learned a ton from what people said about the paper, and sort of the people that approached it from other organizations talking about how it was different.
Right.
I think it was a net plus for Booking. Sort of put that paper out there and get feedback and get known for it. Isn't that the experimentation way? Like, isn't that
There
how
we go. There
like,
we
we do
go.
these things within our own organization as well? So I think that's the core of it.
If you let's take you back to the meeting room where you were deciding whether you were going to click publish or not. Like, were there any doubts? Seriously,
yeah.
were there any doubts about publishing this paper? What were
I mean,
they?
that's what I put in LinkedIn post, right?
Yeah,
I think that paper was, for Booking at least, pretty watershed moment in the sense that until then people had been very, very fearful of publishing,
Right.
because they were, to your point, like they were afraid of giving away the secret sauce. So it took quite a bit of convincing to say, well, no, this part of what we're talking about can't be replicated easily, and so it's safe to publish. But I do think people were still quite fearful of publishing things. So yeah, there was hesitation for sure. I think part of the reason we ultimately published was because we were growing so quickly and we're trying to attract talent.
Fire.
All right?
Brilliant.
And we thought this way we will grab attention and the right people will join us. Because back to the earlier conversation, right? The empowered product team model does require a certain kind of person, a certain kind of mindset. And so if you want to attract that kind of talent, then you have to put yourself out there and say like, hey, we're over here. If you wanna work with us, then come join. So I think that was definitely one of the biggest motivations for finally hitting publish was to become known.
To attract people. Did it achieve that goal?
Well, we're talking, aren't we?
Okay. Yes. Obviously.
I guess it worked.
But people did apply. People did want to work at Booking.com more after the paper. Like I guess that's the question.
I don't know. I mean, that's the kind of there's no control experiment here.
I love
Kind
that.
of sort of
Yeah,
thing.
there's no control. That's
I do think we had people who, when they applied, mentioned either a paper or a talk or some of the
Okay.
stuff we're putting out
Okay.
there.
So sharing knowledge in general, even though it seems risky, like it makes sense. Usually, it makes, unless you're sharing proprietary knowledge or whatever, of course.
Yeah, and don't put everything on the street, to be sure.
Yeah.
I think it's more of a short-term and versus long-term perspective, right? I think if you put the right stuff out there that shows that you're doing cool things and cool people will join, and then like long-term you win. Short-term it might be potentially harmful, but then again, so much of what makes it work at Booking isn't easily replicable. I mean, this is why I left and joined another company, right? I wanted to see whether I
Whether it
could
works. Yeah.
figure out how to replicate this, and I'm finding that it's super difficult because so much of it is entrenched, sort of like this is just the way we do things. And there's no easy way to sort of replicate that. I think one of the things I realized very quickly is that we had experimentation training at Booking that I was running together with Roderick. a lot of the training was happening in teams. When a new developer would join, they would join a team of people who had been operating in a certain way for years. They would look to the left, they would look to the right, and they would realize, actually, this is how I should behave.
Right.
And no amount of training in classroom and no amount of documentation can have that same sort of like indoctrination effect. Like new person joining, adopting the culture of the this
Right.
status quo. And that I think
And wanting to adopt a culture. I think that's really the biggest kind of boost there.
yeah. You have to. The problem with this is you have to do everything all at once.
Yeah.
Give you a good example, right? When people run experiments at Booking and they make a decision to either ship or stop an experiment, they write long and detailed descriptions of why they're making that decision, put them into the tool, and hit the button to make their decision. So they're explaining the rationale. They're explaining, I am shipping this because I believe. Right. They're doing that because they know other people are reading it. And they know that other people are reading it, and they might get challenged on some key points, and so they're being descriptive because they want to make sure that anyone who's reading it might understands what their rationale is, so they don't have difficult conversations after. The reason people are reading it is because they know other people are taking time and energy to write detailed descriptions. How do you bootstrap that?
You don't. Like,
Because it's a loop,
Yeah,
right?
yep,
I am writing because I know people are reading. People are reading because I know people are writing. And so, how do you bootstrap this sort of behavior
Right.
to the point where 2,000 people behave this way? I think that is, and I can't think of an easy way to replicate that.
No, and not quickly at least. Like this takes years, like to get to this. It's organizational culture. I think is probably a good phrase to describe this. And culture is not something you can steal. Like culture is the last thing you can buy. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes the right people. This is super interesting, and I will link that post and the paper in the description of this episode. Lukas, this was such a huge pleasure. It felt like it was long overdue. Such a great interview. Thank you so much for being a guest of No Hacks Show. And to everyone listening, please consider rating, reviewing, sharing, whatever you do with the episodes. And I'll talk to you next week.